Sylvester Stallone was once seen as Hollywood's ultimate fighter, the man who turned rejection into glory and made Rocky Balboa a symbol of impossible dreams. But behind the fame, the muscles, and the roaring box office success, there was one man he could barely stand. Their rivalry was not just friendly competition. It became a private war built on pride, public humiliation, jealousy, and one cruel Hollywood trap that exposed how deeply competition can poison judgment. In 1977, Sylvester Stallone walked into the Golden Globes as a man who had already forced Hollywood to change its mind about him. Just a short time before that night, he had been struggling, unknown, and dismissed by studios that did not see him as leading man material. Then came Rocky, a script he refused to sell unless he could play the role himself. That decision carried enormous risk, but it paid off in every way imaginable. Now he stood inside the Beverly Hilton, surrounded by the very people who had once turned him away, watching as his work was recognized on one of the industry's biggest stages. His presence carried weight, but it also carried expectation. This was not simply a night of celebration. It was a moment where his future would begin to take shape in front of the entire industry. Not far from him stood Arnold Schwarzenegger. At that time, Arnold was still early in his acting journey, but he was already drawing attention wherever he went. His background in bodybuilding had given him a level of visibility that few newcomers possessed. He did not blend into the room. He stood out, not only because of his size, but because of the quiet confidence he carried with him. While others moved carefully through conversations, Arnold seemed entirely comfortable, as if he already knew exactly where he was headed. The contrast between the two men was immediate and unmistakable. Stallone's rise had been built on struggle, rejection, and relentless persistence. Arnold represented something different, something built on control, discipline, and a physical standard that very few could match. Where Stallone told a story through hardship, Arnold presented a vision of absolute power. Hollywood noticed, and without a single word being spoken between them, the foundation of something long and complicated had already been laid. As the ceremony progressed that night, the differences between the two men grew more visible. Stallone's connection to Rocky was deeply personal. The film reflected his own life, his own struggles, and his refusal to be overlooked. Every nomination felt earned through real effort and real sacrifice. When Rocky secured Best Picture, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The applause was strong, the recognition clear. Yet even within that success, a quiet tension lingered. The spotlight was no longer focused on just one type of star, and both men could feel it. There were no direct confrontations, no open challenges, but something unsettled remained in the air long after the evening ended. The comparisons made that night would continue to build through films, public appearances, and shifting expectations for years to come. During the 1980s, Stallone and Schwarzenegger moved beyond being rising stars and became the defining faces of an entire genre. Their names were no longer tied to single films. They were tied to entire identities. Stallone carried Rocky and Rambo, two characters shaped by hardship, discipline, and the will to keep moving forward no matter the cost. Arnold carried Conan, Commando, and Predator, roles built around dominance, physical force, and a kind of certainty that left no room for doubt. These roles did more than entertain audiences. They created two distinct images of what strength could look like. Stallone's strength appeared earned through suffering. His characters absorbed damage, endured pain, and continued forward regardless. Arnold's strength appeared absolute. His characters rarely showed weakness. They advanced with certainty, overpowering everything in their path without hesitation. Studios understood quickly how powerful this contrast could be. Marketing began to highlight their differences even when it was never stated directly. Posters emphasized physique, posture, and presence. Trailers focused on scale, impact, and intensity. The audience responded, and comparison became part of the experience of following either man's career. Weapons and action design became part of the message as well. Rambo introduced heavy weaponry used with precision and purpose. Commando answered with even larger displays of force. The scale increased on both sides with each new release. Explosions grew bigger. Fights grew longer. Even body count became something audiences quietly tracked, one film raising the bar, and the next attempting to exceed it. The escalation was never accidental. It reflected a constant push to remain ahead in a genre that demanded more with every passing year. The physical cost of maintaining that image was significant and real. During the production of Rocky IV, Stallone insisted on a level of physical realism that went beyond standard choreography. He pushed for contact that would translate as genuine force on screen. Dolph Lundgren, his co-star, delivered powerful punches during filming, and the result was not controlled impact but genuine damage. Stallone was hospitalized after sustaining serious injury, including swelling around his heart. What was intended to enhance authenticity had crossed into something far more dangerous. Yet the incident did not slow expectations. If anything, it reinforced his image as someone who did not step back from pain. That image brought attention, but it also set a standard that became increasingly difficult to maintain. Arnold faced a different kind of pressure. His image depended on consistency. He was expected to appear larger than life in every role, every appearance, and every public setting. His physique was not simply a feature of his work. It was central to his entire presence on screen. Maintaining that level required constant discipline, strict routines, and a schedule that left almost no room for variation. For both men, injuries were not isolated events. They became part of the routine. Minor strains were ignored. Fatigue was managed rather than addressed. The body became both the tool and the limit. Then came a shift that did not involve physical effort at all. It came through a decision that would affect Stallone in a completely different way, one measured not in injury but in reputation. In the early 1990s, he accepted a project that would later stand out as one of his most criticized choices. Stop, or My Mom Will Shoot was designed as a comedy, a departure from the intense and physical roles that had defined his image. On paper, it offered a chance to show range and expand beyond the box audiences it placed him in. In execution, it struggled badly. Reviews focused on tone, structure, and performance, often pointing out how far the film moved from the strengths that had built Stallone's name. Instead of expanding his image, the project exposed a gap between expectation and delivery. The audience that had followed him through action films did not accept the change, and new viewers were not drawn in strongly enough to compensate for that loss. What made the situation far more complicated was its connection to Arnold Schwarzenegger. Before Stallone committed to the role, Arnold's name had already been linked to the project. Arnold later explained openly that he had expressed interest in it, fully aware of how Stallone might respond. The rivalry between them had already shaped how each man approached opportunities. A project associated with one could quickly become attractive to the other, not only for its potential success, but for what it represented within that ongoing competition. When Stallone accepted the role, the decision was no longer only about exploring comedy. It became part of a larger pattern where choices were influenced by positioning rather than genuine fit. Arnold's public remarks reinforced that perception. By acknowledging his earlier interest and explaining his understanding of how Stallone might react, he framed the entire situation as a calculated move. One man appeared deliberate. The other appeared reactive. The reviews were harsh, but the deeper wound came from knowing how easily rivalry had pushed him into the wrong room entirely. The fallout stayed attached to Stallone in a way that went beyond a single failed project. For years his career had been defined by control. He chose his roles carefully, shaped his characters, and built a reputation on discipline and conviction. This time the results suggested something had broken from that pattern. The idea that a rival's interest could influence a major career decision shifted how the situation was understood. It was no longer only about a script or role. It became an example of how prolonged competition can reach into judgment itself, quietly steering decisions away from strength and toward reaction. Ego, when left unchecked, can support confidence and drive, but it can also narrow perspective. When decisions are shaped by the need to respond rather than the need to align, the outcome rarely follows intended direction. By the mid-1990s and into the early 2000s, the landscape that had once elevated both men began to change around them. The action formula that had dominated theaters no longer held the same grip on audiences. New storytelling styles emerged. Technology expanded what films could show. Viewers began looking for something different. New actors entered the space with different approaches and different expectations. The dominance that once seemed permanent began to face constant challenge. At the same time, The physical demands of earlier years started to show in ways that could no longer be managed or ignored. Decades of intense training, repeated strain, and demanding schedules had placed real pressure on their bodies. Recovery took longer. The margin for pushing limits became smaller. What had once been sustained through sheer discipline now required adjustment and honest reconsideration. Yet something unexpected emerged from all of it. As the years passed, the tension that had once defined their relationship began to soften. Public appearances between the two men took on a different tone. Conversations appeared more relaxed. Statements reflected recognition rather than opposition. The rivalry did not disappear entirely, but it lost its sharp edge. This shift was shaped by shared experience. Both had worked through the same era, faced the same expectations, and carried the same pressures. The competition that had once separated them also connected them in a way that few others could fully understand. Their later collaborations reflected this change. Shared appearances suggested a balance that had never existed before. The audience saw two figures who had moved through years of competition and arrived at a different and quieter place. Their story remained relevant long after the films and the fights because it extended beyond individual success. It showed how sustained comparison can shape careers, influence decisions, and affect outcomes in ways that are not always visible at the time. It showed how pride, when it becomes the primary driver, can lead even the most disciplined person into choices they later regret. And it showed that perspective changes when time alters the conditions that once seemed permanent and fixed. It was never just about hatred between two men. It was about how long two people can carry pride before it starts carrying them instead.